What is really happening near Huliaipole right now? Why is there such different information from various sources? How did Magyar himself get involved in the situation? Besides that, another version has emerged. Why did we lose a command post in this direction? And most importantly, has a real threat to Zaporizhzhia emerged? A question that is coming up more and more often. So let's get into this right now, friends, step by step, relying on the facts, on the words of the command, the soldiers on the ground, international analysts, but without panic. This episode won't be an easy one, so please subscribe to this YouTube channel and don't forget to like and leave comments. It's very important for the growth of our community. Thank you for that, and let's get started right away. So, what do we know about the current situation in Huliaipole? According to the Southern Defense Forces, Huliaipole remains an area of intense fighting. The Russian occupiers do not have full control over the settlement, but they constantly send assault groups into battle trying to break through our defenses. Our units are actively defending. They detect, block, and destroy these enemy groups. Fighting is ongoing there directly. The front line is dynamic and constantly changing. Well, you understand yourself, it's a huge gray zone. But all the stories about Huliaipole having fallen, that Huliaipole was captured by the Russian army, that Gerasimov is reporting to Putin there, are lies. The defense forces of Ukraine control most of Huliaipole, but I repeat, the situation is dynamic and constantly changing. Our soldier with the call sign Machnoi paints a more detailed but also troubling picture. What does he say? He writes that the situation now resembles the situation in the Myrnorad direction. Here is a fresh statement from Mushnoi, literally just now. He says that the enemy is very active, launching numerous so-called salutes, and most importantly, he notes that the gray zone is expanding and continues to expand. Along the road in the direction of the settlement of Zaliznikne, we will talk about it separately a bit later. This is critically important information. In fact, it means that the area where no one has clear control is expanding specifically to the west, friends. The enemy can now apparently reach as far as the farmsteads before Zaliznikne, and as our soldiers expect, the Russians will soon attempt even more active attacks. Their overall direction, and this is important to understand, is toward the populated areas, Zaliznikne and Stara Ukrainka. In other words, the pressure is coming from the west. Friends, I need to tell you and show you these shots. Please take a look at the screen now. Against this frankly grim backdrop, our main strength stands out especially brightly, the striking force in this direction. These are the forces of Ukraine's unmanned systems under the leadership of Robert Magyar Brody. Their work is simply impressive. Just before the new year and in the first days of 2026, 4 high-value Russian surface-to-air missile systems were destroyed. We're talking about 2 Tors and a book, friends, and pay attention to this. We're also talking about the ultra-modern, as the Russians themselves call it, S-350 Vityaz radar station. By the way, it should be noted that this system was introduced by the Russians only in 2021. Well, it's modern, yes. How effective it is, I don't know, but it's a huge, juicy target that Magyar and his guys managed to hit. So they got involved in this direction, and now we're already seeing the results. In the first days of the new year, the guys are working tirelessly, so huge respect to them for that. But Magyar specifically singles out the Zaporizhzhia direction, and that's what we'll talk about next. That's the area we're most interested in for this episode. And he reported that literally within 1 hour, Ukrainian drones destroyed a Tor and a book in the Huliaipole and Orikhiv directions, friends. This is high-precision work. It deprives the enemy of protection against air attacks and exposes them to our long-range strikes. This is an extremely important development. In other words, our army is not just defending itself. We are now actively taking out key enemy systems, trying to even the odds. And this is very important and telling. Besides this, it must be said that the situation is actually serious, friends. And the seriousness of this situation is being highlighted by leading international media outlets. American CNN, the media corporation, journalists are writing directly, the city is on the verge of encirclement and collapse. They quote a Ukrainian officer with the call sign Banker, who notes that the number of Russian brigades in the south exceeds the Ukrainian ones. Well, there's no secret in that, and that in recent weeks, the enemy has captured dozens of square kilometers. The enemy's key tactic is to send small infantry groups to search for the weakest spots in our defense. CNN also refers to analysts at Deep State who confirm that Huliaipole is now a gray zone because the city is located in a lowland. It is very difficult to defend it. I explained all of this in detail in the previous episode, and there is a risk that our units will only be able to hold the western part of Huliaipole. But that's what CNN journalists are suggesting, friends. Let's pay attention to the official information. I'm giving you all the different points of view so that you have the full picture. I think that was the right thing to do. The German publication BILD brings, I would say, even more questions about the exact situation. They have a columnist, Julian Röpke, a military analyst. He, as you know, has a rather controversial reputation. Some say he's a pro, others say he's just chasing hype. But he, in particular, questioned the geolocation of the footage and the strikes that were published the day before by the Southern Defense Forces. Supposedly, as he claims, the footage wasn't shot in Huliaipole. And in that very Zaliznichne, which I already mentioned, it's a town, a small town, well, a village 5 kilometers to the west. So BILD draws two possible conclusions. Either the footage shows our troops passing through this village, or the Russians have already reached it. Well, I'll repeat once again. If we pay attention to the very recent words of Mokhny, our military officer, he said that they are there in several military units are only reaching as far as they've reached the farmers' fields by rail. But as for them having reached the town itself directly, well, so far there is absolutely no confirmation of that information. And this once again really emphasizes, friends, just how confusing and dynamic the situation is in this gray zone and how many questions remain without clear answers. But it should be noted that this is just the opinion of a single viewer on the deep state maps. It's important. The railway is still completely under Ukrainian control. Now, friends, let's move on to probably the most painful question, one that has remained relevant for 2 weeks now. How did it happen that the Russians captured the command post at Lipa near Huliaipole? We already drew some conclusions about this in the previous episode, and I even quoted to you the direct response from Commander-in-Chief Syrski very briefly. According to Syrski, the main reason is that we, that is our forces, could not withstand the pressure, could not withstand the assault. The 102nd Territorial Defense Brigade, as they retreated, they abandoned their positions, and we had to urgently deploy assault brigades there, our emergency response teams. And in his opinion, there are 3 key points. First, the battalion commander received a clear order. It was necessary to organize an all-around defense of the position and destroy all secret and valuable equipment. This was not done. Furthermore, it was actually possible to hold the position. At least, according to the commander-in-chief, the reinforcements from the 5th Assault Brigade were just a few streets away from the encircled command post. And the commander-in-chief says that the battalion's command could have been handled completely differently. But there is another opinion that has emerged today, or rather yesterday, a more military version of these events from the demobilized journalist Volodymyr Boyko. I should immediately mention that he also has a controversial reputation, but he links the capture of the command observation post to mass desertion and a catastrophic shortage of personnel in the Territorial Defense Forces brigades. According to him, after the loss of the command post in the 102nd Brigade, more than 70 people deserted, followed by another 24. Boyko describes the brigade as completely exhausted, where a company might officially have 9 people on the roster and a battalion only 48. Instead of a full complement, his conclusion is actually quite harsh. It is precisely these infantry units that are responsible for holding the front line, and their exhaustion, losses, and desertion are a direct path to tactical defeats. The thing is, friends, Huliaipole is not just a point on the map. It is the largest settlement in this area and a key logistical hub. Routes to 2 strategic directions pass through it. To the west, towards Zaporizhzhia, a major metropolitan city, and to the north, towards the Dnipropetrovsk region. And control over Huliaipole opens up operational space for advancing the offensive. That's why such heavy, fierce fighting is taking place for it. Such a hard, intense struggle. So we've come to the main question that concerns millions of residents in the south. Is there a real threat to Zaporizhzhia? Here is the answer from our military in this direction. No, there is currently no direct threat of the city being quickly captured. Dmitro Pelik, head of communications for the 118th Separate Mechanized Brigade, explains that even in much smaller directions where the enemy is pressing, they are not capable of fully capturing the territory. The reason lies with the enemy themselves. He says it's due to shortages, poor quality of infantry, weak training, and a lack of motivation. The statistics speak for themselves, he says, because in 3 years of fighting on the Zaporizhzhia front, the Russians have captured only about 2% of the territory. This demonstrates the scale and effectiveness of our defense. For example, the direction from Vasilivka no longer gives the Russians a tactical advantage due to their horrific losses. But they do not care about their losses, and they never have. So, friends, the main conclusion is this. Russia is not capable of capturing Zaporizhzhia right now, but that does not mean there is no threat at all. Their tactics are those of terror, destabilization, constant shelling, missile strikes on the city, attempts to expand the so-called gray zone, and to advance in certain areas. In other words, the goal is not to capture it today, but to exhaust, to keep under constant tension, to create a sense of ongoing danger, and possibly to bargain over these territories as a basis for negotiations. Although, as Budanov said, who, by the way, was offered the position of head of the president's office by the president today. I think we will cover that separately. We'll do a separate episode, but here's some breaking news. Zelensky has offered Budanov the position of head of the office of the president of Ukraine. So, as Budanov said, for the Russians, Zaporizhzhia is a super dream, and they will do everything possible to achieve it by 2026. Right now, this is a completely illusory story, and in principle, it's impossible. So, friends, let's get back to Huliaipole. The situation near Huliaipole is indeed difficult and requires serious attention. The city has become the scene of fierce fighting, the front line is blurred, and the gray zone is expanding. The main reason for the enemy's advance was not so much their advantages, except for the number of infantry, because they really do have more infantry, but rather our internal problems, the exhaustion of certain units, the territorial defense forces, failure to follow orders, possible desertion. We don't know for sure. Right now, all this information is being checked by the relevant authorities. On the other hand, we see the formidable strength of our army when drones under the command of Magyar systematically destroy expensive enemy equipment and hold back the advance. There is no direct threat to the city of Zaporizhzhia, but there is a real risk of its destabilization due to constant pressure on the approaches. Russia does not have the forces to storm a large city, but it does have enough to keep the front tense. So what happens next? And next, friends, the key now is the rapid stabilization of the defensive line in the Huliaipole direction, reinforcement and support of infantry units, elimination of gaps in the command chain, and, of course, the continued effective operation of our strike drone systems. The situation is difficult, but under control, as the military say. It requires no panic. It requires clear understanding, a sharp mind, and strong will, both at the front and, by the way, in the rear, which is important. That's why our task is to support the military, to donate, and to help them. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel. Please subscribe more actively. Take care of yourselves, and